Hey folks, today I'm going to change the spark plugs out in a Husqvarna YTH22V46 lawn tractor. This particular tractor's got the Briggs 22 horsepower Intech V twin engine in it. It's got 2 spark plugs. Thanks for watching. Let's get started. Now to get to the spark plugs, you have to raise the hood. You got one plug on this side and one plug on the other side, so that's where the spark plug is. What you're going to need for this job is a 5/8 spark plug socket. Now spark plug socket's a little different than most. I don't know if you can see down in there, but there's a rubber insert, and that keeps you from breaking the porcelain on the spark plug. It's far better to use one of those than just a deep well socket. Now if you want to try it with just a plain 5/8 deep well, you can do that. Just be careful not to break the porcelain. And you're going to need a ratchet. You're going to need your spark plugs. You're going to need a spark plug gap gauge, which is going to, there are various kinds, but this is one type. I like to use the wire type because I think it's a little bit easier to get an accurate reading on the gap. But you can use feeler gauges or a different kind of spark plug gap tool if you like. The plugs that Husqvarna and Briggs recommend for this engine, or specify for this engine, are Champion RC12YC. Now you can cross-reference that to a different brand of plug if you like. Most all of your small engine plugs will give you a cross-reference so that you can pick the right one. And then they also specify a 30 thousandths gap, and for folks outside of the US, that's 76 millimeters. So the first thing I'm going to do is take out the existing plug and show you how to do that, and then I'll gap the new one. So all you do is take this plug boot off. It just snaps off, and you want to let the engine cool off, of course, before you do this, because if it's hot, that plug's going to be hot. And if you have a interesting story, if you have a hard time getting the socket up on the plug, look in that hole and check around the plug, because one time when I did this, I had a mouse that had crawled up in there and died and was actually wrapped around the plug, and I couldn't get the socket onto the plug, so I had to dig him out first. You put your ratchet on reverse counterclockwise and just slip it up on the plug like that, and take it out just like any other bolt. Now Husqvarna and Briggs recommend that you change the spark plugs on this engine every 100 hours. Husqvarna says change the plugs out every 100 hours or at the beginning of every cutting season, whichever comes first. Now I'm using an E3 brand of plug just because that's what my local store had. They didn't have any Champions. I would have probably bought Champions, and you can probably go to your automotive parts house and buy some, but I just happened to be in the big box and that's what they had. So I noticed also, if you check on Briggs' website, Briggs & Stratton recommends platinum plugs. Husqvarna does not make that recommendation. They don't say anything one way or another about it. So I think you're probably better off using platinum plugs for the Intech engine, just because that's what Briggs says, but I don't know that it's necessary. So what I discovered is my plug gauge doesn't have a 30 thousandths or a 76 millimeter gauge on it, wire gauge on it. So I'm going to go to feeler gauges, which can also be used, but you do need the little, well, to do it properly, you need these attachments on the plug gauge, because they're used to bend the electrode of the plug closer or further away from the center. You don't want to do it with a pair of pliers or with the gauge, because then you'll end up breaking the center portion, the conductor. So I'm not going to try to teach how to use feeler gauges here, but basically what you're doing is you're taking 30 thousandths, and then you check the gap between the two electrodes, the top one and the center one, and you want it to be snug but the gauge to be able to fit. And so that's a pretty good fit. I'm not really going to have to adjust that one. That's a good 30 thousandths fit. So I can leave that like it is. If I have to adjust it, then what I do is I take my my plug gauge with this on it, and then I can use that one of these slots in there to catch hold of the outer electrode and bend it by prying on it in or out. But like I say, what you don't want to do is adjust the gap by sticking something in here and prying it, because then you'll break that center conductor, or that porcelain. So one of the other reasons that spark plug sockets have a rubber piece in them is so you can take the plug and you can put it in the socket and kind of snap it in, and it won't fall out. So you can get it down in the plug hole in the port and get it started. Now, I also recommend not just starting it with the ratchet. I usually take my socket off of the ratchet and I hand start it. That way I know that I don't have it cross-threaded, because you don't want to cross these threads up. And a lot of these heads that the plugs go into are aluminum, so if you cross the threads it'll really screw it up, because the plugs are steel. So anyway, I'm going to get it in there. It goes in at a slight angle, and get it threaded. And I usually go on up to finger tight. Now, Husqvarna doesn't say anything about a torque spec on the plugs. Briggs & Stratton on their website for an Intech V-twin, they recommend 15 foot-pounds maximum, but they don't really give an actual torque spec. They just say don't torque it over 15 foot-pounds. So I'm going to snug it up. And you would be perfectly fine to just snug it up like that and leave it. But just for argument's sake, I'm going to take my 3/8 drive torque wrench, and I'm going to set it. They said 15 foot-pounds maximum, so probably be okay to do 10 or 12 foot-pounds. So 10 foot-pounds is 120 inch-pounds. So there's 120. I'll do 130 inch-pounds. And then on spark plugs, I always recommend holding the ratchet out here, because you don't want to crank down on it this way. If you do, you stand the risk of breaking this porcelain. Okay, there we go. So, just for reference, it's a little past snug. That's a pretty relative term, I guess, but if you tighten it up with your ratchet and then maybe give it another quarter turn past snug, that's going to be somewhere between, I don't know, 12 and 14 foot-pounds. Or you can do what I did and torque it to that exactly. So okay, once you're done with that, then you just take your boot. You want to check in there and make sure it's not nasty, and make sure that the contact isn't broken or anything like that. Let me see if I can zoom that in for you to see it. Right inside of there, if you can see that, there's a round metal contact, and what that does is that snaps over the end of the plug. The end of the plug looks like that. It's just kind of round and it's screwed onto the end of the plug, but that contactor inside the plug wire boot snaps right onto that. So then, yeah, you just take the, as long as there's no damage in there and it's not full of crud or, you know, dead mice or anything, then just snap that on there and you'll hear it snap on. And so that side's done. Then we're going to go over and do the other side. So same deal. There's your plug wire. Just snap it off, and put your ratchet on there, and then the plug will come out. You also want to be careful, you know, not to drop your plugs, because again, these things they're made of porcelain, this part of it, the insulator part, or porcelain, and they break real easy. And so then check the gap. Gap on that one's just a touch loose, so I'm going to tighten it up a touch. I'll take the gauge and I'm going to real slightly bend that in. It doesn't take much usually to, there, that's good and snug, so that's going to be fine. I take my socket and just put the plug in there, make sure it's in there good, up to the hex part of the plug, and then get it threaded. And like I say, it kind of goes in with a little bit of a angle toward the front of the engine. Get that, snug that up. And I'm going to torque it with the torque wrench. And I support it out here, just keep from breaking the porcelain. There we go. So that's good torqued. Inspect the plug boot, which is fine. It's clean and not dirty and not damaged. Pop it back on. And now we're ready to crank it up, see how it runs. Wonderful. So that's it, folks. It's a fairly simple process. Take out the old plugs, gap the new ones, put the new ones in, being careful not to cross thread them, and then torque them to the manufacturer's spec. Again, be careful to let the engine cool before you try to do this job, because the engine will be hot and the plugs will be hot, and you don't want to grab hold of them and burn yourself. Once it's cooled off to the touch, it'll be fine. So thanks for watching my video. I appreciate it. Please subscribe, like my video if you would, share them around, and I hope to see you back soon. Thank you, and God bless you.